What I'd like to do now is introduce both of your presenters to you today. Very exciting. I've known both of these people for, almost 20 years at this point, and I love listening to them speak, and I really hope you enjoy them as well. Dr. Martha Burns is up first, and she's an adjunct associate professor at Northwestern University and has authored 3 books and over 100 journal articles on the neuroscience of language and communication. Dr. Burns' expertise is in all areas related to the neuroscience of learning, such as language and reading in the brain, the bilingual brain, the language to literacy continuum, and the adolescent brain. Dr. Martha Burns is a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association and the director of neuroscience education for scientific learning. We then have Beth Connolly, and she's joining us as well. It's very exciting. I've known her for a long time, and she's also a speech language pathologist who's been working with Fast Forward for 18 years. She used Fast Forward in her practice and then implemented it in school districts across the Northeast and Midwest of the United States. She now serves as an education consultant working with our Fast Forward Home program. So please help me welcome Dr. Martha Burns. Are you there, Marty?
Thank you, Carrie, and welcome, everyone. I had to get myself off mute. Can you hear me okay, Carrie?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. So I'm delighted that you're able to come today and talk about inside the brain of a struggling learner. And really what this falls under, as you probably know, is educational neuroscience, trying to understand why school is harder for some students than others. And that takes us to understanding some of the components of learning that underlie learning, if you will. So let's just start with, if we were to ask a coach, all of you of students in schools around the world, if you were to ask a coach, a baseball coach or a football coach or a soccer coach, we just saw the women's soccer team win a world championship, what underlying capacities are necessary to achieve in team sports? The coach will likely say things like strength and endurance, quickness, and then a huge thing they'll say is motivation. Is that student really going to work hard? Do they really want to excel at this sport? So let's just talk about what's motivating to you, because an awful lot of children that are struggling in school, the parents and the teachers say, well, they just don't seem that motivated. So let's just talk about motivation for a minute. What is motivating for you? And let's just say, which task would you look forward to most at the end of today? Would it be walking, running, strength training, swimming, or eating? Probably most of us who are parents or teachers would say, well, it would be eating because I'm tired and I've worked hard all day. But there might be a few of you out there that are exercise fanatics that would say something else, like running or walking. And that's good. Exercise is a habit, but it's a good habit. And if you're motivated to do that, that's great, because that's what we're trying to do with our students, is motivate them to have good habits and to be excited about those habits. So which tasks below are you most motivated on when you have a day off and you're kind of tired? Do you want to respond to emails from people that maybe are informational on some subject related to your work? Or do you want to make a phone call about an issue that's going on maybe with your child at school? Do you want to return a phone call from a friend? You want to cook a new meal? Would you like to go to a movie? Would you like to play tennis, golf, bridge, or some other avocational sport? And probably most of us on our day off want to do something that we are good at. And that's really where this is taking us, is that if you're good at something, if you like to read and you enjoy reading, then you sit down with a good book. If you've read all week, though, and that's what you have to do, let's say you're an English teacher, maybe you'd like to do something that's more relaxing, like play bridge or golf or go to a movie. And it's important for us to all realize that when we're talking about our students, they're going to be the same. Our children are going to be the same way. Children are motivated to do what they do well, and if something is hard for them or they anticipate it being hard, they're going to put it off. That's just human nature. Now, to help me a little bit right now, let's just ask a question of you. How familiar are you with the underlying reasons that your child might be struggling? Is this something that you've studied and you know a lot about? If so, you can click on that first circle. If you have some idea but you'd like to learn more, click on the second circle. And if you're not sure and your child hasn't received any specific kind of diagnosis or extra help and you're just not sure but you're just concerned, click that on. Excuse me. And then other than that, you can tell us with a little in the question and answer window. So scroll down, click the right one, press submit. I'll give you a minute. Okie doke. So what we have is that several of you said, yeah, I think I really understand why my child is struggling. I just want to know more what to do about it. And then some of you said, about 2/3 of you said you have some idea, but you'd certainly like to learn more, and that's probably why you're on this webinar. A few of you said, well, maybe, but the vast majority of you fall in that category of yes. I've looked into this, and I really would like to learn a little bit more, but I do know a lot already. So with that, let's conclude with that last thought about motivation. Excuse me, my coughing. But all of us, athletes, parents, teachers, professionals, are motivated at tasks that we expect to do well with. We aren't motivated at tasks that we expect to struggle. In the same way, good students are emotionally invested and motivated to work hard in school, but if a task is not likely to be rewarding, they're going to have trouble with it. And there's a lot of research on that now. And there's a specific chemical that's released, and I'll explain this slide to you because it kind of explains it, about motivation and the relationship between motivation and the expected cost versus the expected reward. And you can see this is research that was just published this year, just about a month ago. But essentially, when we are talking about being motivated to do something, we're looking at the benefit that we expect versus the cost, the effort, the work that's going to go into it. And when you anticipate something good is going to happen, let's say you decide that you want to cook a great meal tonight after the day is over because you're really looking forward to how it would taste and sitting down with the family and having a nice conversation and it being relaxing. Then what is released in your brain is something called dopamine. And dopamine is a neuromodulator that gets you excited and gets you stimulated to work hard. It actually gives you a lot of energy. And so you have a lot of energy when you're cooking. You might be exhausted from the day, but you get into the kitchen and you start cooking and you're energized. Or you look at an athlete who goes out to play a basketball game and they may have not have been that excited, but they get on the floor and they see the crowd and their anticipation is that they're going to win and the coach says, we're going to win, and that releases dopamine and then that drives them to perform at their very best. When we don't have dopamine, our brain is in a rest state. It's in a relaxation state, maybe. You could have other things going on. You could have other neuromodulators that are associated with stress, for example, that we'll talk about. But dopamine overrides that, and dopamine is what gets you moving and gets you going. And it's very important then that students be able to achieve, because if they can do well in school, they're much more motivated in school. And, of course, that's why you're all here. So when we look at the human brain and what we understand about that now from the brain, we know, of course, and all of you know, that 3/4 of your brain is getting information in from the world around us, and that's we call those the sensory lobes, and that's the temporal lobe, which gets information in from sound. It's the parietal lobe that gets information in from our body, and the occipital lobe that gets information in from vision. Then the other big part of our brain at the very front, the frontal lobe, is about acting on the world. And that's where motivation comes in. That's where you decide what you're going to do and when you're going to do it and how much effort you're going to go into doing it. And that is the part of the brain that builds as students are in school. And school is very important in building not just reading skills or math skills, but very important for building this energy that goes into what we call regulation, being goal-oriented, being attentive, paying a lot of attention to what's expected of you and trying to accomplish that. It takes years for the frontal lobe to develop and to mature, but school is a big part of building that. Then within this brain, we have these cells, the neurons, that link with each other through long, expansive pathways. And educators who are teaching our children to read and teaching mathematics, and some of you may be homeschooling, all of you are building those pathways so that neurons can communicate with each other efficiently. So if I decide I want to do something, if I want to hit a baseball, I can do it efficiently and I can do it quickly. If I want to read, I can do it efficiently and quickly. That's why we measure fluency, for example, in reading. And these pathways develop very slowly. This is a graph. It's a little hard to see probably on your screens, but it's showing you the different trajectories and pathways and how they mature over time in children. And one of the things you can see is that the cortical regions, that big red line, the divisions of the brain, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the neurons themselves mature really right before birth and then right after birth. And that's a steep slope at the very beginning of life. But those fiber tracks, those yellow lines, kind of orange line, and the blue lines are developing much more slowly and developing over time based on experience. So what we say is the brain is an experience-dependent organ, and that experience is everything from learning how to perceive speech sounds, and this is just an example of the primary auditory part of the brain that becomes wired for first sounds themselves, high notes and low notes, and then after a short period of time, from birth to 2 years of age, starts to become wired for the speech sounds of your native language, whatever your native language is. And if you have 2 languages, it becomes wired for that. And little neurons in that part of the brain will become specific for a specific sound. So if a person hears a b in the word ball, then the b neurons light up. And if they hear the k in the word cat, the k neurons light up, and so on. And that takes time to develop, but it's a big part of the maturational process. And the brain areas build based on use. So that's why we say the brain is an experience-dependent organ. So we have the regions that are essential for language and reading, those particular, and emotion, those areas are going to build and develop based on the experiences that a child has. And that's why it's so important, and I know all of you do this, to talk to your child a lot and to engage the child in language, because you're building a lot of the architecture of the brain that's going to be used once they get into school to be able to listen well. But those parts of the brain are also building for stress. So if a child has stress in their world, then there will be parts of the brain that will become much more sensitized to stress. And the child might react faster to a stressful situation or react more strongly to a stressful situation. And then we have this whole building process that's exhausting. The reason that a little baby sleeps so much is the brain is just constantly building and experiencing and building and experiencing. And so when brain regions are building, it's important to to understand, all of us to understand, that the child is going to be tired and stymied and frustrated. And so are we, by the way, as adults. If we took up a foreign language, if we took up a sport we never played before, if we got a whole new job, during the first few months of that experience, when our brain is trying to learn those new skills, we will be tired and we'll be stymied and we'll be frustrated. That's part of the brain building process and important to the brain building process. Then over time, what happens is that the brain builds greater and greater connected regions, and these are called networks, and they're similar to your telephone networks, if you will. So you might have a telephone network with your contact list, and your phone is going to efficiently enable you to contact a person on your contact list. They, in turn, can easily contact you. You're going to know it's not spam or some kind of a robocall. And the brain is doing the same thing. It's building these efficient networks. So if a child gets a lot of experience with math, then they build up the math networks. And that's a big part of school, obviously, is to build these networks. And then what we end up with at about a 7 or 8 year level, about second or third grade, we end up with a part of the brain and a network that's called the reading network. And the reading network consists of regions in the frontal lobe that allow us to actually carry out the act of reading. But we also have lots of regions in our temporal lobe and our occipital lobe. In the temporal lobe, we're listening to the sounds of language and converting those to the letters that we see in the occipital lobe. We're integrating those together. We're attaching meaning to those. That's all that light green in the temporal lobe. And then we carry it forward to the frontal lobe, where we use it to read and to learn from reading. And we often say that third grade is the division between learning to read and reading to learn. And so this network builds. It takes time to build, and in some of our students, it takes longer than others. And there are reasons for that, and we'll talk about that. But generally speaking, the brain is designed to learn language, but it isn't necessarily designed to learn to read. Humans have only been reading for about 1,000 years. And so for many, many years, human beings spoke to each other, but they didn't really read. And so we have to superimpose reading on language networks. And we all have different strengths. Some of us are very good at social skills. Some of us are very good at mathematics. Some of us are very good at music. Some of us are very good at art. And that's been designed by our genes, and it enables us to learn those and develop those networks easily. And so other networks may take more time. That's a big part of the reason some students struggle. We talked about stress. Stress, this is from a book by Sapolsky, who's a neuroscientist at Stanford University. The book is called Behave, came out in 2017, and was actually a bestseller for a neuroscience book. But one of the things he talks about is the effect of stress, and how when we're under stress, we need a little bit of stress. It's a U-shaped curve, as you can see over in the right, an inverted U, because if we don't have enough stress, then we become actually lethargic. Our brain just stops functioning. And if you want a good example of that, look at someone who's in an extended care facility, a nursing home, where they're being dressed and they're being fed and everything's being chosen for them. And what you notice is they forget the day of the week, they forget their children's names, they forget all sorts of details because the brain is understimulated. On the other hand, if we go over the top of that curve and a child is overstimulated, or where the brain is over undue stress, then learning also is impaired. And the reason I like to emphasize that is that when a student is struggling in school, that is stressful. So they may have a wonderful home life, and it might be very comfortable for them, and they may be very talented in lots of ways, but they get into school and they feel like they're not as smart, quote, as the other kids. That is stressful. And that in and of itself can interfere with their ability to learn. just a lot of moderate stress is okay. You need that little bit of stress. So we need to have grades. We tried for years to have ungraded classes and learned that if you have ungraded classes, kids don't work very hard. So they need a little bit of stress, we all do, but just we want to make sure that the stress is in that moderate range, not the overextended range. Now, Adam Ghazali made a great comment, I think, in a book he wrote recently, that when we think about education, we think about content, and teachers think about content. They think about, well, this is what the child has to master in terms of their vocabulary at the end of first grade, in terms of reading vocabulary. These are the math facts they have to master at this point. This is the science facts they need to master by this point. And content, of course, is important, but we do need to keep in mind that there are underlying capacities, and that's why you're all here today, that support learning. And those underlying capacities, just as in sports, where balance and coordination and flexibility and strength are important, in learning, we have underlying components that are also very important. A book that Adam Ghazali wrote recently is called The Distracted Mind, and he's a neuroscientist at UCLA. And what he is arguing is that one of the things that's happening is there's so much media impinging on children that it's very hard for them to sustain their attention in school, where it isn't rapidly changing and where you don't have all sorts of icons and things they can manipulate. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But before we get to that, I'd like you just to write down your thoughts about what you ultimately hope to your child will achieve. And just so you know, this won't be broadcast, so whatever you write isn't going to be posted on the next slide. And it is just for our edification, too, as a company that designs educational neuroscience software. What are parents looking for? What are parents in need of? So if you just want to take a minute and jot down the ultimate hope you have for your child, just a sentence or two will be fine. We'll just give you a second to do that. And then we'll talk again about these underlying concepts, these underlying capacities. And as soon as you're finished typing, just click Submit. Takes a little longer to write than it does to click buttons, so I just want to give you a few more seconds to do this. Okay, so what are the underlying capacities then that support learning, and what are those capacities that might be interfering with your child's ability to succeed in school the way you'd like them to? This is where neuroscience comes in, and we have really two categories of underlying capacities that are essential for learning. One are called executive function skills. Think of these as self-regulation, and this again is this prefrontal lobe that develops, takes a long time to develop. We aren't fully self-regulated, if you will, until our 30s. But self-regulated means that we can set goals, that we can pay attention and strategically focus on what's relevant for those goals and ignore things that isn't relevant. So attention is an executive function. Another executive function is working memory, the capacity to hold information in mind. When a student's listening to a teacher talk, they have to be able to hold the content in mind. They have to be able to focus on the teacher. They have to remember what the teacher said a minute ago and 5 minutes ago and an hour ago. If they're reading a book and they're on chapter 3, they have to remember the characters that they were introduced to in chapter 1, and they have to hold all that information in mind till they get to the end. That's called working memory, and those are two very important components of executive function that are essential for children being able to listen in a classroom and learn from instruction. Then we have some other cognitive skills that are important as well. One of those is processing, specifically what we'll call processing time. Remember back to the slide about athletes and coaches and the skills that they say are important for a good athlete. One of them is quickness. Well, we also have the same thing in learning. And a kind of euphemism that teachers sometimes use to describe a child who they find is learning easily is they say, well, he's really quick. He picks up things quickly. Well, it turns out how quickly your brain can process information is very important. And we refer to that in the world of neuroscience as processing speed. And that includes lots of different kinds of processing speed, being able to listen attentively, hold on to the information quickly, and then move from one topic to another, to another, to another. And then sequencing is important, especially in reading. You have to know what came first in a story, what came second in a story, what came third. If you're going to write something, you have to write it in some kind of an order. But also sequencing is just important for learning all sorts of content tasks, whether it's mathematics, which requires sequencing, or science, or history. And so these are some capacities that we've learned you can train. And when you train those capacities, especially if you train them as embedded in content tasks, you can drive the brain through these very repetitive experiences to be much better at learning. So that's where the Fast Forward programs come in. The first thing I want to emphasize is the Fast Forward programs train attention skills. And by training that, they enable students to be able to attend to especially an auditory signal, because that's what a student has to be able to attend to. They have to attend to a teacher talking, especially in the early grades. And the attention training is embedded in other kinds of tasks, like reading tasks. And I just want to show you an example of one of those activities. This is called Fish Frenzy, or Flying Fish. And what you see here is that this penguin, when the child presses the little button over on the left that looks like a paw print, the penguin will say a word. And in this case, the penguin might say the word like. And in this particular example, these are going to be sight words. So these are going to be words that children see frequently and have to just memorize as words. And then words are going to flash across a page from left and right, and the child has to click on when they see like again. But they have to not click on if they see similar words like pike or hike or something along those lines. And it might be a word that is another sight word that looks kind of similar to that. And so, like light, for example. And so the child is going to have these distractors. And what you're doing is you're teaching sight word reading. At the same time, you're teaching attentional skills. And there's a classic way that that's tested. It's called vigilance, where we call it a go, no-go task, where the child only clicks when the right word is on and they don't click when the other words are on. And what we've shown is that when you have that kind of training, attention skills improve dramatically. What you're looking at on this chart is on the left-hand side of the bar graph, you see children who have language and reading impairments before and after they went through Fast Forward, what is now called Foundations. The second group in the chart, the bar graph here, is typically developing children. That's what TD stands for. So those were students who had no learning issues at all. And then you have a group that didn't do the fast forward, a control group. And what you see is both the typically developing children and the children with language and reading problems showed dramatic increases in their attentional skills after this kind of training, the training on fast forward. And notice the typically developing children, the students that weren't identified as struggling in school, started off higher, but after the training, they both benefited almost equally as much. So we can get our students above, their attentional skills above typical students, and we can do it in a relatively short period of time, and they can be as good as the top students in the school when they're done. Now, another kind of a task that you can work on, this is a working memory task, again, cognitive skills, but again, it's embedded into reading activities. So a child will look at a screen and they'll hear the word dig, and they'll hear the word big, and they'll hear the word pig, and then they'll hear dig again. and they have to remember which of these particular paint images here, which of these little satellite images, it was the same as the word that's lighting up right now. And they have to match that. So it's like a concentration game, but it's actually a concentration game with words that are written words, the kinds of words that they're working on in school. And so you're working on cognitive skills embedded within actual reading instruction, if you will. The fast-forward exercises address standard reading instruction as well as underlying capacities. So once they get into reading, they have phonological tasks, phonological awareness tasks like this, where they hear the bear says the word wheel, and they have to find a word that starts with the w sound. And you can see that they have 4 choices down there, and the initial sound is what's highlighted here, so they're looking for a w, and they'd have to know that's a w, and they click that on. But then they get higher level reading tasks where they have sentences where there's one word that's different in a picture, and they have to identify, pay attention to the detail of the sentence and find out which picture matches, or which word series here, which sentence matches the picture. There are activities that work on spelling. So the student has over there a picture of a twig and something like that, and then what they have to do is pick out the letter that's going to complete the word for them. So again, we're motivated and we excel at what we do well at. Fast Forward and Reading Assistant Plus are designed to increase academic skill performance that leads to good grades, anticipation of rewards, and it makes learning new information fun. And so we know from lots of research, Fast Forward's been out there now for 20 years, over 20 years, that we not only build up academic skills, but we also have changes in interest and success in activities associated with school as well. We have the students do better in lots of areas as well as academic areas. So I'd like to turn this over now to Beth Conley, the educational consultant for scientific learning, and she can talk about the role of the education consultants who you might choose to have work with you. So Beth, it's off to you.
Thank you very much, Marty. I appreciate listening to all the great information you shared with us. And I'm going to take a few minutes, everybody, to explain to you what an education consultant is, and to let you know that when you sign on to work with Fast Forward and Reading Assistant with your learners at home or at school, you will be assigned one of my wonderful team, and we're all girls, we're all ladies right now. And what happens is we're the exact opposite of a support network where you have to call the 800 number, press 1, press 2, press 8, and then get disconnected. You actually will learn to know who we are. The first thing that will happen is we will you'll get an email from us introducing us to you, letting you know who we are, letting you know that our job is really to guide you through best practices to achieve maximum results. So, and we are going to be your go-to person for questions and for ideas to help your learners do their very best work and get the most out of Fast Forward. So you'll get this letter, and we will hope to call you and talk to you very soon after you receive the letter, because we want to be sure that you set up for success, that your learner at home knows, how to get going on Fast Forward, where would be the best place for them to run Fast Forward. Do they have the headphones? Do they have a quiet space? And to go through what we expect in terms of their commitment, because we do know, after many years of research, that the work that Marty described that happens in a learner takes consistency. So we know that our best results come from learners that get on and use Fast Forward every day, 5 days a week, ideally. To see those brain changes, to see that learner become efficient and very quick in the classroom, on the sports field, in music lessons, anywhere they go, because this is actually a way to help enhance learning in all areas. We then will we'll do a startup call with you to make sure after you get up and running with your student that you're with your learner at home, that they are doing well, that you don't have any questions. You can always reach out to us by email and say, whoa, I'm not really sure if I'm following along the way I'm supposed to, we are here to answer questions. There's also a support team that can help you with technical questions. You will be receiving, every single Sunday, you'll receive a report, and it will go over how your student is doing on Fast Forward. And what will happen is we will go over that report with you. So you'll receive your first report on a Sunday, and we will go over that report with you. We'll talk to you about how they're doing. You know, we can definitely see strengths and weaknesses. We can see learning patterns. You can ask us questions. You can say, oh my gosh, I noticed that, you know, my son did really well in this area, but he was struggling in that area. And then we will definitely be going over some interventions, some ideas to help them to learn better, those things that are difficult for them, and to celebrate those things that are really going well. And we will talk to you every other week. And we will ideally talk to you every other week and talk and send an email on the off week, just keeping you posted on where your son or daughter is in the program, how far through the content are they, and to certainly check in with you to see how they're doing. We're going to have goals to set with you. You will have your own goals, as Marty was asking you. What are your hopes for Fast Forward? Well, you and I, or you and your ed consultant, will talk through some of those goals and some of the strategies for achieving those goals. We also will celebrate what works with you. One of the things I think that people really love about having an ed consultant work with them is to really be able to tune into strengths of their children, and to be able to celebrate with those learners the wonderful skills that are developing, the great attention and focus that are happening, the fact that they come in and finish every day something that maybe, you know, is difficult after a day of school and other activities, to fit this in and to commit to this, and then to see their skills in school improving so much. I'm going to finish by talking a little bit about success stories, and I'm going to give you two examples of success stories. One of them is a 30-year-old woman, and she had central auditory processing deficit all her life. And she read about Fast Forward and decided, what the heck, you know, this looks like something that might help me. Even though I'm now a working adult, I really, really have to write down everything that people tell me to do. I can't always follow along in conversation the way I'd like to. And I'm just going to see if this helps me. And her quote the other day was that she really wished that she had this when she was young, a young girl, because she cannot even believe. She said it feels like a new life to her. The first thing she noticed is that she could hear lyrics and songs that she never heard before. And that when she goes to work, that she is not needing to write down everything in list form the way she used to have to, that she can actually remember the things to do. She also said that her conversation with others is much more lively and integrated, and that she understands and she's more social, and she feels more a part of her work environment and her friendships. The other success story was from a mother who brought two of her sons over to Fast Forward, who loves to read. And she used to read to her children in utero. And, you know, she just dreamed of someday having kids, and they'd all sit in big, comfortable chairs with their books and curl up, because that's her thing in life that she loves most. And her two boys were struggling, learning to read. The one was 7 and the other was 9, and they didn't enjoy it. And she put them through Fast Forward. And one day I called her, and we were having our every other week conversation, and she said, "You're not even going to believe this." She said, "I came downstairs, and my 7-year-old was curled up in a chair, and he had a book, and he was enjoying reading that book." So those were two really, really wonderful success stories, two of many, many stories that we've all heard and enjoyed hearing over the time that we work with parents. And it's the thing that gets us up in the morning and helps us be excited about our work. So we really enjoy the one-on-one with parents. We often also talk to their children because sometimes they get on the calls as well. So it's a really wonderful, very supported, focused relationship that helps get best results for anyone who's using the program. So we really appreciate having this minute to go over this with you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm going to hand this back over to Carrie to take it from here.
Okay, well, thank you, Beth, and thank you, Dr. Burns, for your portion of the presentation. Got some good questions today. Also, feel free to type them into your QA window. Again, it's the purple icon at the middle of the bottom of your screen. And the first question we get a lot on the Fast Forward Home team, and we also got a lot on this webinar, a few people wrote it in, is reading comprehension seems to be their child's issue. My child can read, but cannot recall what she's read. So, you know, parents always, you know, and a couple of people have expressed that on this webinar. It's like, you know, how is it my kid can read but can't comprehend what they're reading? And so that's the first question I'm going to start with. And Dr. Burns, do you want to take a stab at that question? And then Beth, I'll come to you if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. So you all know if you picked up let's just say you reached into a cabinet. This happened to me not so long ago, and I took a coding course. I decided I'm right here at Northwestern. I'm on faculty, and I thought I'm going to learn how to code. And I got the textbook, and I started reading it, and it was like Greek to me. It made no sense to me. I could decode the words, I could read the words, but I wasn't familiar with the terminology, for one thing. I wasn't familiar with the concepts that underlie coding, and it was just way over my head. It would happen to us if we picked up a book, probably some of us on physics and the theory of relativity. If the concepts are concepts that aren't familiar to you, you can decode, you can sound them out, you can figure out how to read them, and many of them have Latin roots, so they're pretty predictable, but you don't know what they mean. Now, that's one reason that a child might have a comprehension problem, and that may be that the vocabulary is not within their vocabulary range, or that the concepts are just not familiar to them. But another issue can be that they can read and they can decode and they know the words and they know what they mean, but they can't hold on to it. So they read the introductory paragraph and then they go to the next paragraph and they forget what they just read. And I'll give you an example of what that's like if you take a multiple choice question and you have a child who's got multiple choice question and it says, Abraham Lincoln was the president during blank war. And then there are a list of wars, World War I, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. And the child reads the sentence and then they read World War I and they go, wait, who is this again? And they go back and they look at the question and they go, oh, Abraham Lincoln, right. Okay, so World War I, Civil War, I think it's Civil War. I'll look at the next one, Revolutionary War. No, I don't. Wait, who was it again? Oh, Abraham Lincoln, right. Now, that student has a working memory issue. And so what's happening is they read a sentence, they understand the sentence, it makes sense to them, but they can't hold on to it when they get to the next sentence or two sentences later or a paragraph later. So they keep going back. So if you have a child who keeps going back through what they read because they're just having trouble remembering it, then that can be a working memory problem. And then other children can decode well. They know the vocabulary, they have pretty good working memory skills, but they can't maintain their attention. They're easily distracted. So they read a paragraph, and then all of a sudden they think of something that they have to do. They get up and do it. They come back down and they sit down, and then they start reading again, and then something happens outside the window, and they're distracted, and they get up and they go and they do something else. So children with attentional problems, children with working memory problems, or children whose basic language skills are such that the vocabulary is hard for them may have comprehension problems even though they can read very well. And then the last reason some children have comprehension problems is if the grammar is too complex. If the sentences are too long and too convoluted, the boy who was not carrying the bag of bricks next to the girl who was standing at the school was being followed by the boy with the blue shirt, and it's just too much information in a sentence. And it's not that they don't understand those words. The words are fine, but they just fall apart because the sentence level is too complex for them. So those are all issues that can be sorted out. As Beth said, you can figure out pretty quickly after a child's on foundations, for example, or literacy, oh, this child seems to be struggling with working memory. No, this child seems to be struggling with attention. Whoa, this child seems to be struggling with grammar and complex sentences. Whoa, this child seems to be having trouble with vocabulary. You can highlight all of those, you can figure them out, and then you can target the exercises that the child can benefit from to really improve their comprehension skills very quickly.
Hey, that's great, Marty. I think, too, one of the things I go through and all of us go through with our parent conversations are so many times in Fast Forward when we look at the results, when we look at how the students are progressing through the exercises, parents will say, that's exactly what they struggle with in school. I can't believe you picked that up. And Marty's talking exactly about what that is. Is it sequencing? Is it memory? Is it the grammar? Is it And I do also think there's another piece involved, and some of the older students we work with that have had a lot of stress around reading. If you stress too much about it, anything that you do, your short-term memory gets impaired. So sometimes kids can't give us what they know because they feel so stressed around that environment. So that's just another piece I've noticed with struggling readers and struggling learners who have already identified themselves as those who struggle, those who are not good in school, which is a thing we really try to work with here at Fast Forward to help build that capacity and that confidence again.
Okay, that's great. We get that question a lot, so that was wonderful. Both Dr. Burns and Beth, I really appreciated that. The next question I have, and we get this a lot. Does this program help with ADHD and math?
Okay, I'll start, and Beth can come in as she did before. Our results, yes, do show. I have some marvelous slides from school districts around the country where you show that all subject areas are impacted and affected and improved with the Fast Forward programs. And that's because when you improve memory skills and when you improve attention and when you improve these underlying cognitive capacities, not to mention what Beth said, when you improve a child's confidence that they can actually learn, then it shows up in every single subject area. So it's one area we're all used to tutoring a child who has reading problems and having them go to a reading tutor. But what led me to Fast Forward in the first place and continued to use it for years in my practice was because I could improve reading in one child, math skills in another child, science and higher level high school activities in another child, all with the same. You still want to do some tutoring and some teaching, obviously, of the content, but with the same building these same underlying capacities.
Yeah, I would just add to one of the things that when I talk to parents, when we all talk to parents, a lot of times attention and focus is an issue for many, many students running through Fast Forward. And I have found that parents will laugh with us and say, well, if we can get them on, their attention will improve. And so to get them attend to Fast Forward will then help build their attention, because that's really, our scientists have very carefully planned and built attention and focus into the work of Fast Forward. And we often chuckle about that because, if you have a child with ADHD who has trouble sitting and focusing, but then we get them on, we get them focused, and they end up with feedback from all kinds of people, teachers, coaches, specialists who work with them. Whoa, your son or your daughter really can sit longer and pay attention and learn better. So it's really a very exciting change that we hear about over and over again.
Okay, so the next question, and I've seen this a lot also, is about autism and fast forward. And this question specifically is about, does this program help with non-readers? My son knows his letters and most letter sounds and has autism but cannot read. He's 6, almost 7, has developmental delays. What can fast forward do? Probably in a more general way too, because this could be a teenager with autism or an adult with autism. What can fast forward do to help with autism?
Okay, and the one slide that I did show of changing attitudes toward learning was a slide that was taken from data collected by a woman whose name was Gigi Poglich, who worked with autistic children and collected data on over 100 autistic children around the country, children diagnosed as on the autism spectrum. And what we have is those data, those were what we call retrospective, meaning she went to the therapists who had worked and the educational consultants who had worked with children with the diagnosis, and went to the parents and had them complete questionnaires about their improvement as well as having test data. But what we show is a profound effect, not just in the students' academic skills, their reading skills, which we do show remarkable reading improvements in those children, but also in their social skills and in their communication skills. And so fast forward builds those skills as well as Beth said, attention skills, working memory skills. It can also be a component for children on the autism spectrum, and again gives them confidence that they can do this and that they can succeed at it. And because children on the autism spectrum very frequently like technology, they often are some of the most responsive children to the program because they enjoy technology, they like using a computer or an iPad or a tablet, they're willing to do the exercises, and we have quite a bit of research. We also have some university research that was done showing that it improves underlying auditory perceptual capacities of children on the autism spectrum as well, so that they become better listeners and they can pay much better attention to the spoken word.
That was
and Beth, any
perfect. Everything that she said is, I would second it, and I've seen it, and I would totally agree, especially with the fact that any of the students I've worked with, whether it was in my practice, in schools, or now with home program, they really like computer work. There's a really nice engagement there, and so it's been wonderful to watch the results. And what Marty said about being able to listen, being able to take in the detail inside language when they're hearing language helps them to be better listeners and better communicators, which is part of the social piece of autism. So, yeah, all that Marty said is certainly more comprehensive, but I just have found so many good things and good results, and we've all found good results with autism spectrum disordered people, adults and children.
And okay, so our next question, and I think I would love to hear both of your thoughts again, since you both have private practice experience with the program and working with children for a lot of years. This parent is asking, professionals often recommend medication to slow the brain down for better focus. Does fast forward replace the need for medication, or is it recommended to use it with the medication? Medication is, as probably everyone knows who's listening, is a determination made by a physician. One of the things we're not in the business of doing is making medical advice. But I will say, and Beth can chime in on this too, in my own private practice, I have had many students who were diagnosed with ADHD, or some students on the autism spectrum that were taking attentional meds or other kinds of meds, sometimes anti-anxiety medication, sometimes other kinds of meds. And they were able to go off of the meds after they went through Fast Forward. They were actually, their attentional skills and their listening skills, their anxiety decreased in school, and they were able to go off of the meds after they went through Fast Forward. Now, personally, what I always recommend is if a child is on medication, that
I consult with, or that the parent consult with the physician and ask them what they would recommend. Would they recommend that the child utilize the medication while they're doing the Fast Forward program so that they get the maximum benefit out of it, and then reevaluate the child afterwards and see if they still need it or if they can go to a lower dose? But those are all decisions that should be made by a medical professional in terms of medication. One other just a side I want to add, though, here is seizure medications. If a child is on any seizure medications, anti-seizure medications, if they have Landau-Kleffner or another kind of neurological seizure disorder and they're on seizure medications, we always need to clear that with the physician to make sure that the physician is letting us know what is needed, how much is needed, and what to look for in case there might be some kind of an interference. And so we as a team and the educational consultants as a team can work directly with the physician. They can talk to the physician, or the parent can work with the physician to make sure that the medical decisions are made by physicians and the educational consultants make the educational decisions.
And certainly that's the case for me too, and we would never make any medical decisions. I worked with a very unusual group. I worked with emotionally disturbed behavior disorder teenagers, and I ran a study using Fast Forward on this population. They were 11 to 21-year-olds, and it was found, as Marty was saying, that they were reevaluated at the end of Fast Forward, or maybe in the middle of Fast Forward, and maybe some of them were reduced in their meds, some of them did not require meds, but that was definitely a medical decision. But I did have one very extreme example of a young man, 16, who required 4 therapeutic holds a day because of behavior. He was very violent against others and himself, and he was a very extreme behavior disordered child. And it turns out that believe it or not, after Fast Forward, he did not any longer require holds. So that was not anything I had ever expected. But I think it goes back to what Marty talked about earlier with executive functioning that's built as we cross-train the brain and the memory, attention, processing, and sequencing areas, and we're able to, I think he was able to think through his behavior decisions better. Than just go into these tempers that he was getting him into an awful lot of trouble. So, thanks.
And then also I think it does relieve the anxiety, as you said earlier, Beth, associated with feeling like learning is not something you're good at, and suddenly you feel confident. And so the anxiety around school and academics decreases, therefore the confidence in their ability and the motivation to work hard increases, and so they don't need as many ancillary aids sometimes.
Totally.
Okay.
And some of the feedback from teachers were just that they had seen a student raise their hand that never had before contributing in class. I had one teacher write, I didn't know this student had teeth, because she had never seen him smile. So that speaks to Marty's point about improved self-esteem, a feeling of, I can do this. I actually can learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions because we're getting close to the top of the hour. If we don't get to your question, please email it to us at webinars@scilearn.com, and you could always reach us there. And you could also reach us at fastforwardhome.com. It's up on your screen right now, the slide. So if we have students or children going through the program and they've got issues with either working memory or attention or processing or sequencing skills or reading comprehension, do our reports show what the specific weakness is for each learner on the program? And Dr. Burns, can you address that? And then Beth can weigh in.
So what you have is, depending on the particular product that a child's on, they usually start with something called Foundations 1, or they start with literacy if they're an older student, if they're in the 5th grade or older. And in each of those groups of exercises, there are 6 or 7 exercises that a student's doing. And like flying fish, for example, we could tell that a child might have some issues with attention if they're struggling with flying fish, and we can look at the error data, but what we see is they're not struggling with other sight reading tasks. If a child's struggling with working memory, we can see that on the concentration-like activities. They might be able to sound out nonsense words very easily in some of the exercises, but when they have to hold on to it and remember where it was on a grid, when they have 12 other choices and they fall apart, then we can start telling if it's a working memory problem or if they have trouble following commands, but they can do other language tasks. And so the advantage of having the activities that these students do gives the educational consultant a beautiful picture of, as Beth said earlier, of a child's strengths and weaknesses. And of course, what we all educators and all therapists want to do is capitalize on a child's strengths, commend them on those strengths, but build up those weaknesses so they don't hold them back. And that can be identified after just a few weeks of a child participating in the programs.
Yeah, I was just going to add, when you do look at your reports, we do teach you to read the reports, and you'll see that some of the lines on the graph will go up pretty well. Like, you're going to see that some nice progress that's going steadily up, and then in some of the exercises, they may not be moving as well. And we are skilled, thankfully, because of all the years and all the students that have been through Fast Forward, in giving you ideas of how to help boost those areas that are causing your young learner to struggle. So we've got tried and true ways of doing that. We've got all kinds of resources, and amazingly, parents come up with their own that are great resources that we end up sharing with other parents because we do work so well together. But yeah, it's we do see right away. We do see that maybe it's a memory issue. We do see that perhaps it's they don't have correct enough grammar to complete certain tasks. We do see that sometimes the processing is a little bit on the slow side. That's not usually a surprise to parents. So yes, we can see patterns, and we can actually alleviate some of the issues around that and help students come through those blocks and learn.
Okay, we're a little bit after the time of the webinar, but two more hopefully quick questions. One question is around dyslexia. How specifically can Fast Forward help with my child with dyslexia? That's the first question.
All right, well, and research was done at Stanford University and then replicated at Harvard Children's Hospital. With children with dyslexia, they used functional imaging of the brains of children with dyslexia as well as reading testing, and Fast Forward showed significant, use of foundation showed significant changes in the parts of the brain that need to build for reading on functional imaging as well as reading comprehension as well. So we have tried and true research supporting the value of Fast Forward with dyslexia. Both studies involved children diagnosed with dyslexia. And then there is more research that's come out since then by Nadine Gaab, Gaab, and you could look her up if you wanted, who's been studying the use of Fast Forward with dyslexia and the brain level differences as well as the perceptual differences that result, and that is ongoing. And so we have a lot of corroborative research on dyslexia and Fast Forward.
And just quickly, I worked with a school for dyslexics. It was a boarding school outside of Buffalo, New York, that had never used Fast Forward, but they used Orton Gillingham and other systems in place, and they had always had nice results with dyslexia. They started using Fast Forward along with those programs, and they started to see improvement they had never seen before. It was the pairing of the two was really very powerful.
Okay, last question, I promise, and then we'll wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for staying. And again, this is being recorded, so if you do need to drop off, we will get a recording to you. What is a reasonable expectation of the results I could see if I put my child on Fast Forward?
Well, every child's different, and every child responds a little bit differently. So the average gains are if a child is about a year behind in reading, for example, or a year behind in academic skills, you can expect about a year and a half gain in 6 months of use if you use it 5 days a week, 40 minutes a day. But that will depend. Some students are more behind than that. Some students are 2 or 3 years behind. One of the questions was, well, my student can decode, but they still can't read and comprehend. So the results are going to depend on where the student is, and then how many areas are in how many areas the child is struggling, and what the cognitive needs of the child are. So let's just take a real quick example, and then I'll turn it over to Beth. But if I have a child, let's go back to a sports analogy because I think it always kind of makes sense. If I have a child who wants to play baseball and they're really fast and they can run beautifully and they're really good at catching a ball, but they really have trouble with the hand-eye coordination for hitting a ball, then that child, I just need to work on hitting the ball, right? And I can send them to a batting cage and really work on that. But if a child doesn't have strength and they aren't very agile yet and they don't run very fast, then I have to work on more things and it's going to take a little longer. And that's the same thing with learning. So, what I saw in my own clinic, and Beth can speak to this, is I was working with students and getting some great gains and getting them to make a year's growth in a year, but that wasn't fast enough to catch them up. And once I started using Fast Forward, I was making a year and a half growth, sometimes 2 years growth in a year, and then the students were starting to catch up with their peers, and that was what was so exciting about it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It's also the age of the student is important. You may have I had non-reading 15-year-olds, so I might see a bigger jump in their academic skills. I did see as much as 4 years of gain in reading in the course of a year, but they were way behind, and a lot of it was just this remediation that was needed that was given to them in Fast Forward. We do, as a team, often use a parent survey. I think it's a very important thing to take a picture of where your young person is, your son or daughter, in terms of their ability to pay attention. What kind of grades are they getting? Are they social? Do they get the joke? Can they write a paragraph? Can they sequence their thoughts when they're trying to retell a story? All those sorts of things. It's not just all about reading. There's many, many learning activities and social behaviors that you need to kind of take a snapshot of and then look at the end of Fast Forward and see what kind of changes do you see. There's a lot of things to celebrate. This isn't just one note piano. It's got many, many facets to it.
Okay, well, I want to thank Dr. Burns and Beth for joining us today. That was a great session today. I really hope everyone enjoyed their time with us. Again, you will get a link to the recording in the next couple of days. You can also email us at webinars@scilearn.com if you have any questions after the webinar, and we will be back in touch with you soon. So again, thank you, Beth and Marty, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's conclude our webinar for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and we'll hope to see you online again soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.